Right, hello everyone. Time for another whiskey. Let's get cracking. I'm feeling a bit thick-headed today. I feel like I'm coming down with something, so I'm just going to crack on and start looking about and try not to waffle too much, which I'm doing already. So, baseball cap is because my hair is an absolute mess underneath, and I'm not subjecting you to what's underneath that. So, today we will be having now it's called a pure malt. It's from Ballantine's, which you have probably heard of in some form or another. But the pure malt, now pure malt is another phrase or another term for what used to be called vatted malts, which the Scotch Whisky Association then turned around and went, vatted malts is too confusing for people to differentiate between vat and blended whisky and single malt whisky. So what we'd like you to do is they now need to be called blended malts, which sort of blurs the line even more. But hey, who are we to argue? So, a lot of companies, and Johnny Walker did this as well with their green label, I'm sure they did at one point, they called it a pure malt, and quite a few brands did this, where pure malt essentially meant the same as vatted malt, which is the same as a blended malt, which is a blending of just single malt whiskies. So there is no grain whisky involved. It is just single malt whiskies, but from more than one distillery. So it could be 2, it could be 200. Don't think there's that many distilleries in Scotland. Well, it could be a blended malt from all around the world. But it is, if it's more than one, if it's literally 2 single malts from 2 separate distilleries are blended together, it's a blended malt, stroke vatted malt, stroke pure malt, because pure malt sounds a little bit more elegant, and pure malt is closer to single malt. You know, it's pure rather than blended malt. It's all marketing baloney. So anyway, Ballantine's, which you've probably heard of, and yet in the UK is quite hard to get hold of, predominantly because it's so huge in the rest of Europe. Now, Ballantine's is named after this guy, George Ballantine, who in 1827 opened a shop in Edinburgh. He was the son of a farmer, and he opened a shop in the centre of Edinburgh, basically as a grocery store, which became very popular. And in 1865, he actually handed the reins over to his son Archibald in order to move to a bigger new shop in Glasgow. And the scale of the shop and the success that he was having meant that he could basically continue what he'd already started, which was blending whiskies, and blending predominantly grain and single malt whiskies. Now, one of his whiskies, which was Ballantine's Classic, I think they called it, which was their standard blended whiskey, became very, very popular, and he was actually blending whiskey with his son George Jr. Must have spent ages thinking up that. And he died in 1891, but 5 years later, Queen Victoria actually visited the city on a regal visit and bestowed a royal warrant on Ballantine's, the company, with their whiskey, which is a big bloody deal. So already they've got a fantastic reputation, and the royal warrant just kind of like lifted them to another level entirely. And they were very big in America, and in 1935 they were purchased by a group led by Hiram Walker, who was a US entrepreneur who saw the benefits of the whiskey industry and basically took advantage of it and started amassing this incredible empire of whiskey. He was responsible and owned a Canadian club, which was enormous. He started buying up distilleries in Scotland left, right and centre, and quite a few of them were actually purchased with a view of continuing and ensuring the constant supply of whiskey for blends such as Ballantine's. Now, in the 1960s, he then started focusing on Europe and Central Europe, because America was pretty much sorted and Europe was kind of a burgeoning market, and it was still quite popular, but it needed somebody to really power through and really dominate the industry. And by 1986, because of his focus in Europe, in kind of Central and Southern Europe particularly, by 1986, Ballantine's was the biggest selling brand on that continent in the whole of Europe, even with the UK, which it wasn't really doing that well in. It was mainly Europe, it was the biggest selling brand, and in terms of the world, it was the 3rd biggest in the world, mainly because of the power that it had in Europe. So it was bought by Pernod Ricard in 2005, and it's part now of the Chivas Brothers kind of wing of Pernod Ricard. Now, the market leader for them is the blend, but they also have the pure malt, and essentially it's the blend where it doesn't have the grain in. Now, this has got, it is said to have a blending of 40 single malts in there, which is quite an amount, and it would be interesting to know what percentages from what distillery and everything like that. It seems to be that the vast majority of it is from Milton Duff and Glenbergie, which are single malt distilleries that you don't tend to find much of as, I'm pretty certain you don't find them as standalone official bottlings, and it's quite hard to get hold of independent bottlings simply because all the whiskey that they make is made for Ballantines, and it just goes straight in the blend and straight overseas and gets sold by the bucket load. But it's interesting to see a pure malt. You don't get too many of them around because blends and single malts at the moment kind of dominate the market, and blended malts are sort of stuck in the middle going, well, we're showing you the best of what single malts could do together, and a lot of people are going, well, I'd rather have blend because it's cheaper. The problem with blended malts is you've got the higher cost of production because you haven't got that grain production to keep costs down. So you're having to get expensive single malts together and still charge the same amount as a single malt, technically. But you haven't got the cachet of being a single distillery and having that tradition and blah, blah, blah. It's a hard sell to sell blended malt, and that's why there's not that many of them around. So, even with a bit of a thick head, we'll give this a go. Now it's 40%, yes, definitely 40%. You're only looking at about 25 euros in Europe. I'm not even sure if this is available in the UK, but when I did a bit of a search and came across some Italian web operators, they were selling this for about 25 euros, and it seemed to be the same in Germany as well. So it's a pretty decent price, you know, even with the crappy exchange rate we've got, it's about 20 quid. Something like that, you know. It's not huge for a vatted. I'm going to keep saying vatted malt because that's what I grew up with. For a blended malt, it's a decent price. There's not a huge amount on the nose at all, really. There's a bit of softness, slightly floral, but not a huge amount. It's very light. There's vanilla in there, but there's not a huge amount of anything, to be perfectly honest. There's a decent richness to it. Because there's no grain in it, there's not too much of a edgy, harshy, metallic-y feel that you tend to get with blended whiskies, particularly ones with high grain content. Obviously this is all single malts, so you would expect there to be more of a depth to it and less of an edge, and it's there, and it's very, very pleasant to drink. There's just not a lot to it. There is vanilla, there is a very slight floral tone, there's quite a soft, creamy fudge vibe to it, but again, it's not obvious, nothing's coming up to the fore. That's pretty much it. That's my review for this whiskey. It's all right. It's perfectly pleasant to drink. It's extremely inoffensive. There's fuck all to it. There's nothing. There is nothing at all. There is a whiskey flavour. There is a bit of fudge. There's a bit of vanilla. There's no burn. It's a bit boring. In fact, it's quite a lot boring. It's doing nothing for me whatsoever. It's not even annoying me because it's so boring. It's dull. It's like brown corduroy of whiskey. You could buy that as a present for somebody, and unless they were a proper whiskey geek who wanted to wax lyrical about everything and wanted to tell everybody what they knew about whiskey, it would probably be alright. My father-in-law would bloody love that because he could neck that like nothing else. He's not an alcoholic, he just likes drinking whiskey, and he drinks a lot of it, and he doesn't really get drunk. But he doesn't like anything that's particularly challenging. Fuck all about that is challenging. Nothing about that challenges you whatsoever. And that's not a bad thing. I can be positive about this whiskey in that it does nothing wrong whatsoever. It doesn't really do anything right, but it doesn't do anything wrong. It's like, I don't know, James Milner, a footballer who plays for Liverpool and plays for England and just does his job. He's not exciting, he's not a bad player, but he's not a particularly brilliant player either. He's just very solid, very dependable, and really quite boring. This is the James Milner of whiskey. There. I've got nothing else to say. It is that dull. So yeah, that's another one down. I shall see you at the next one. Ta-ra!